Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on trust, the bedrock of leadership. My name is Major Richard King. I'm a reserve officer and second in command of 103 Regiment Royal Artillery based in the Northwest. Since April 2020, and with the help of a number of other reserve officers from across the Royal Artillery, Royal Logistic Corps, the ETS branch, and a number of other CAT badges, we have been routinely running virtual development activities for the reserve potential officers to allow them to prepare themselves for AOSB. What started out as a group of 12 RESPOs has grown to become a national initiative of over 270 RESPOs taking part in at least one event. For tonight's presentation, we have over 500 participants registered, and I'm delighted to welcome Colonel Matt Ketterer, DACOS Education and ETS Branch Colonel, as our keynote speaker. Following his presentation, Colonel Ketterer will be joined in the virtual room by Second Lieutenant Joe Hughes, also of the ETS, who will lead the Q&A. Please use the Q&A option for specific questions to Colonel Ketterer and the chat for general comments. Colonel Ketterer's presentation is very much focused on you as the future young officer cohort, so do add your questions to the Q&A, and I believe there is an opportunity to vote up those questions, so please do participate. Colonel Ketterer was born in Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire and was educated at Ipswich School in Suffolk. Following a BA Hons in Russian and Serbian at the University of Nottingham, he commissioned into the Educational and Training Services in December 2000. As a subaltern, Colonel Ketterer was a Learning and Development Officer at 10 Army Education Centre in Tidworth, and with the Welsh Guards and Royal Scots on Op Palatine, and a platoon commander at the Army Technical College, Foundation College. He went on to be SO3 ETS recruiting at RHQ AGC and 2IC 18 Army Education Centre in 16 Air Assault Brigade. Following a short stint as OC 18 Education Centre Group and OC 18 Army Education Centre Group, and on promotion to Major, Colonel Ketterer attended ICSCL in 2009. His initial grade 2 appointment was as SO2 Recruiting Operations in Army Headquarters Recruiting and Training Division before assuming subunit command at 32 Army Education Centre Group in Northern Ireland. On promotion to Lieutenant Colonel in 2014, Colonel Ketterer was selected to attend the Advanced Command and Staff course. Between 2015 and 2017, he was Commander, Educational and Training Services South, and in 2017 was selected to take command of East Midlands University's Officers Training Corps. This included a 6-month deployment on Optoral as Senior Advisor to the First Deputy Minister of the Interior, for which he was awarded the Queen's Commendation for Valuable Service. In February 2020, on promotion to Colonel, Colonel Ketterer deployed on OpShader as head of the Professional Training Division within NATO mission, focused on institutional reform across the MOD, training schools, and professional military education pathway. In August 2020, he assumed the position of DACOS Education and ETS Branch Colonel. Sir, thank you very much for giving us the time this evening to come and talk to us, and we very much look forward to your presentation.
Comms check, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you, Colonel.
Brilliant. And you've got video?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Richard, thank you for that introduction. I nearly fell asleep listening to it, so I feel Richard's painful reading it, and those of you had to listen to it. But it's kind to invite me here to chat. Apologies for the Jack and Rory look, but I've got well, 4 children, 3 quite young children, and anyone who has young children knows that this is the witching hour. So if you see someone running in with a towel and a mask on, it will be probably my 6-year-old. And there's nothing more humbling than trying to think you're in the army. Well, I'm in the army, and of a credible rank, than being among 3 young children who last week I was on Skype in the middle of a call, and my 6-year-old, complete with Incredible Hulk mask and fists, came and punched me in the side of the head. To be fair, I was grandstanding a little bit, rather dull, and to be honest, I think I deserved what came my way. But if you do see the minor disruption from a couple of young boys, do excuse it, and we'll get moving. So trust. I was really grateful to Richard to ask me to come and chat this evening. It's slightly disconcerting doing so virtually because you having done a few of these sorts of things before, but less so on over Zoom, I'm used to gauging gauging the audience, relying on those senses that we're accustomed to, be it seeing people's faces, seeing people's eyes glaze over, and hopefully not too many falling asleep in the background. But I feel like I'm sort of blind to a lot of that. So I'm hoping you'll sort of stay engaged and I suppose be enthused or at least interested in what follows. The intent really is to unpack the concept of trust, and for me, within the construct of leadership, and also as part of a key element of high-performing teams. I think it's often talked about, particularly now, even more so in today's environment, in the COVID-stricken environment. And you have to look in the sort of the work domain and see how people are working and seeing how people are operating to know that you can understand these organisations where there's sort of a high trust and a high return situation, and those where there's less trust. And I think as time goes on, I think the trust quotient and trust dividends goes down somewhat. But it's good to start off with a definition, and we will certainly do so. And the way I would like to approach this is, counter through a couple of definitions, a few, exposures on the slide, which you'll see from sort of authors from books which A, I've read, but B, I really kind of commend to you. We can explore a bit of the sort of the extension activities and wider reading later on, maybe. But then to talk a little bit about doctrine, don't switch off, it's not that bad. A couple of case studies to provide. I'm not going to do a load of the so what, I'll do a few of the so what's, but allow us perhaps to provoke thought when it comes to questioning afterwards. And then just introduce a couple of theories which I think are really, really great. I've purposely not gone hard at military literature because, those of you who are joining and are looking at a career or dipping your toe will have plenty of an opportunity to read the likes of Slim. But I learn a lot from good practice that's outside that resonates with me as an individual and someone within Green. And I think we can learn far more from those outside sometimes than we perhaps give credit for. So we'll push on. Trust, I think, I Google trust. It's always good to be reminded of what it was. And I put pretty much the first definition that came up there from Merriam-Webster. And it kind of two components: assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or trust of someone or something. So the note of sort of character is pretty important. And then one in which confidence is placed. So I trust someone and I have confidence in an individual to do X, Y, Z. None of that's a surprise. So we'll start off with that as a sort of a firm baseline of understanding. Next slide, please. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt 1 second. Just from a technology standpoint, would it be possible to sit a little bit further forward, please? The sound is not as perhaps as good as it could be.
Is that close enough?
A little bit too close, but yes, if you could be a little bit closer. There's a couple of people who've commented that they're struggling with the sound a little bit, so thank you.
Is that okay now?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. Apologies. They were fruit from a fairly dulcet introduction. I'm an educator. I'm a proud educator. I've done 20 years in the Army within learning and development. I always thought about teaching and joining the Army, and I joined the ETS, Education Training Services branch, because I realised I could do both. And I've spent 20 years predominantly with the purpose of making others better. I certainly felt that was our purpose front and centre in the OTC. And those of you who have the privilege to go through those organisations, the setups, A, they're amazing, and B, I would challenge anyone to readily admit that they've come out of that experience not having been brought on. And if you do feel that, drop me a line, because I'd be really interested to find out why. But what can we learn? A guy called Rolf 2001 talks about this reflection model. What happened, so what next? And I'd ask you to, as we're going through this presentation, some of the ideas, kind of think, what was said, what does that really mean, and what does that therefore mean for me? Or what will I do for it next? And think about these 3 questions, or these 2 questions. One of them has 2 components. One is, what have I learned today, or we've discussed today, that will make you a better person and a better leader? The second bit is, what have I learnt today or discussed today that will make me a better team player? And finally, what have I learnt today that will make those in my care or those under my tutelage better? And crucially, what am I going to do about it? Now, I'm not going to necessarily ask for a 5-column action plan with milestones and smart objectives, but if you've got a notebook to hand, jot some stuff down, because it's important you mine the value from interventions such as these, so that you can get stuff from it, but most importantly that those in your care can come on as a result. So share it. You'll see a couple of slides, quotes on the slide, and I will signpost a few books going throughout this presentation. And an absolute must-read is James Kerr Legacy. 15 chapters built around, some people talk about that it's a business book, others, I think it's a leadership book, and actually a kind of a lifestyle book, living your life well. And it's very easy, it's very digestible, lots of signposts, so lots of little articles and books to go out and find out more. And you could finish it in half a day. It doesn't take particularly long, but it's really, really good. I think I've read it 3 or 4 times now. But he talks about the fact that successful leaders look beyond their own field to discover new approaches, learn best practices, and push margins. They then pass on what they have learned. It's this adage that leaders are teachers, and that comes out, front and centre, continue throughout the book as it looks at the All Blacks and their ethos and how they come on as players. Humility, great character, identifying with purpose. No person is bigger than the team, and being truly authentic. It's a brilliant read. I sort of signpost it to you there. Next slide, please. Okay, 2009, I was, as Major King said, I was doing a job, SO2 recruiting operations in Army Recruiting and Training Division as a lowly major and a very junior major, or a very important major, but a very junior major. I thought it was important. And there was a recruiting drive that focused on how do we present the Army as a really credible organisation. And there was this proposition that with lots of universities recognising that there was a deficit in employability skills, stand past the ATC, but there was a deficit that those were graduating sharp academically but arriving in the world of work without true employability skills, that organisations could engage, go into universities and take part in sort of lunchtime and afternoon seminars on certain subjects. And we got involved, and I was the sort of, I suppose, the pilot to go in and deliver what was called leadership from the people who worked with it. So I'd go into certain universities and I'd chat, as I am to you now, fortuitously round a table with, I don't know, 20 or 30 people, maybe a few more. And the irony was that nobody ever asked me, what book have you written? Because at the time, there was, apart from, I've got it on my shelf here, Serve to Lead, the good red book. And I'm not talking about Michael Aspel, This Is Your Life, although I'm pretty showing my age there. But leadership from the people who read the book, no one said, where's your doctrine? What is your book? Because the Army message and the Army brand in terms of leadership is globally revered and has huge impact and lands really, really well. So no one asked. Had they asked, so I said, well, there's this kind of book I kind of read a bit at Sandhurst, but that's about it. And I sort of forged my way into discussing some of our approaches, which were, there was a bit in, what was then ADP, so Army Doctrine Publication, Land Operations. But there was no real doctrine. And then what happened is Sandhurst evolved, so that was 2009, and there was this deficit. The Army set up the Centre for Army Leadership, and then it developed the Army Leadership Doctrine, which was on the back of what used to be called British Army, the Developing, or Sandhurst Developing Leaders Guide, and then British Army Developing Leaders Guide. All they did was change Army and Sandhurst and put in Army. And there's some really good stuff in there, but it wasn't really read, or it was perhaps socialised a bit at Sandhurst, but didn't have reach out in the field army. So once they set up the Centre for Army Leadership, they then, 2015, implemented what's called the Army Leadership Code. We'll touch on that in a second. And then this book, this pamphlet, Army Leadership Doctrine. And because it had the word doctrine in it, nobody read it. And I read it. I might be a bit dull, so excuse me, but it was really easy, really digestible. A few vignettes. The key takeaway was that if you're a leader, all you need to do is point, because any picture associated with Army leadership has someone pointing in the direction with cam cream on, irrespective of your name, the office or not. But the point is, because it's doctrine, people chose not to read it. or a lot of people didn't read it, and it didn't land as well as it could have done. And you know, Field Marshal Owen Robert was absolutely right. You know, we write some of the best doctrine. To be fair, some of it's quite difficult to digest. It's it's fortunate that none of our officers read it, and I think that's really true. And when I went to the OTC, East Midlands OTC, clearly the finest OTC there is in the United Kingdom, that nobody switch off now. That we had doctrine, but people hadn't really engaged with it. People hadn't really immersed in it. And I was very uncomfortable with officer cadets going down to Westbury, darkening the doors of Army Officer Selection Board, not knowing enough or much or enough, depending how you identify it, about leadership. So I set about producing a kind of an aid memoir on a slide. Next slide, please, Jamie. Where I thought, could I unpack it and put it all on a page? And I think, yeah, I kind of could. And what you see in front of you is Army leadership doctrine on a page. And it's if you've not seen it, doesn't matter. But perhaps take a snapshot, a photograph of this slide, or I'm sure the slides will be available. To have it, to dig into it and try and understand it, because it's really, really straightforward. And it's broken up into what leaders are, so their ethos, their values and standards. It's all about character. What leaders know, what's important to them, professional competence, problem solving, decision making, military history, doctrine. What leaders do, so the things that leaders do or proficient leaders do to get things done is something called the action-centered leadership model, built around, oh goodness me, Professor John Adair, which has talked about achieve tasks, build teams, develop individuals. How leaders do it, and this was really about the behaviours. 2015, it came out just before the doctrine. Acronym, leaders, slightly a bit cliche, and people put it in the signature block and argue they were now leaders. But for me, the proof is, are they inculcated? You can understand, and are those behaviours, underpinning, are the behaviours and actions underpinning words and deeds, I suppose. And then a bit about developing leaders. And for me, it really helped actually sometimes putting something on one page in a diagram like this to really crystallize it in my own mind, and it made it really written. It made me realize just actually how good the doctrine is. It's just a shame more people aren't engaging with it, because I think it's all encompassing and matters not whether you're 18-year-old or 55. It's good to refer to, good to learn from, and good to kind of benchmark yourself against some of the areas. It's not a tick list, but there's a lot in there. On the top left-hand side, it gives the definition, and I think this is really important, and remembering this through this sort of the next 40 minutes or so, that Army leadership is a combination of character, knowledge, and action to inspire others to succeed. Crucially, a unifying purpose to inspire others to succeed. And my own belief is, if you're not developing others, then you're not leading. That appears quite binary, but your job is to develop more leaders, to make more leaders, and theoretically to make yourself redundant. Not through bad behaviours, heaven forbid, but through being able to be replaced quickly, succession planning. So why a platoon commander would be replaced by a platoon sergeant by a section 2IC, a section commander, and so on. So there is always someone in your shadows ready to step up should the need arise. But it's also bigger than that. That if you're doing what you should be doing, you should be bringing people on your duty. So that's kind of Army leadership doctrine. Particularly pertinent to this presentation, we talk about character as an element as fundamental within the construct of trust, because good character and upholding the Army's values and standards promotes cohesion, trust, duty, and commitment. And also, when you look at, for example, land operations and our command philosophy, which is mission command, it's fundamentally, mission command is centralized intent. So produce an idea at your one or two up bosses and then their bosses as to what needs to happen. But decentralized execution, state the what, not the how. Allow innovation and creativity to follow. And underpinning that, there are things like shared understanding, absolute commitment to to what you're doing, but also trust. To be trusted to get on with it without being meddling. And to trust that the intent you've been given, the fact that you will be resourced in order to be successful so that you can achieve your mission. So trust is fundamental within that construct. So I just signpost those two elements, but for wider consideration as we progress. I would normally ask if there are any questions, but we'll push on and got plenty of time for those at the end, so jot them down if you've got them. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Another good book, Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. And I was digging into this, and I talked about some of this back at the ATC, and some of those online. I've been roped by a couple already on WhatsApp, but a couple of them will remember some of these elements. And the concept really is he talks about a number of things, but I think two things I'm going to focus on. First is trust tax. And where you have an environment which is low in trust, it costs that organisation, assume it's in the workplace, time and cost in terms of money or resource to get to the end of a particular goal, a particular task, a particular objective. Because where it's something like mission command, where trust is imbued and trust is a given, they're free from being. There's no meddling. The intent is articulated, the execution is decentralized, and people get on with it. But where there is low trust, there's micromanagement, there's interference, there is questions over people I'm being checked up on, and as the person who might be doing the checking up on, it's taking your time, it's taking the time of others to check up on that person, and actually, so it hurts you in terms of speed and efficiency, and their cost and efficiency, but also drives down things like morale, culture, and performance. And anyone who's worked in a low trust environment will get disillusioned really, really quickly. And I had a particular moment as a young platoon commander in a training regiment, which I'll talk about in a bit, where there was a really low trust environment, and I absolutely hated it. There was stuff I could do, and I did plenty, but we can explore that in a bit. So that's the trust tax. It's obvious. A lot of models are, but it still gives us to kind of signpost. The next bit, and I took the image off Google, and I rotated it 90 degrees. My math is rubbish. I think it's 90 degrees because I didn't like it how it was portrayed, and I'll come on to why I don't like how it's portrayed in a minute. But Covey argues that trust is broken down into a number of elements, and were you to go onto Google and type in, trust matrix hierarchy, something like that. The number of people, and I forget who they are, so I apologize, who unpacked what he produced and put it in like a hierarchical structure. And if I had a whiteboard, I'd sort of draw a bit here, but effectively at the top you've got trust, and it's underpinned by two key supporting elements, one being competence and one being character. Character and competence. And that in order to be trusted and to trust, you have to be of sound character and good competence. And what does that mean, high competence? And what does that mean in real terms? Well, he further breaks down character into integrity, so doing the right thing at the right time, doing what is right, linked with honesty and excuse me, is one of the Army's values and standards, and actually is considered one of the values, and is considered a master value. You either have integrity or you don't. I believe it's quite binary. And the second element is intent. Are you well intended? Are you doing it for the right reason? Is it to benefit you, or is it to benefit others? Is it to grandstand? Is it for reputation? Or is it, actually to put one of your own on the pedestal and shine a torch on them for doing some really, really good work? So integrity and intent underpins character. Moving across, you then have competence, and competence is broken down into two areas. Capability. And there we're talking about someone who's got not the right knowledge, skills, and experience. They teach and learn from others. They stay current, so they're competent in that sense as well. So it's about having the capability to execute the task. I would like to give this to a competent person because they are experienced at doing this particular task. And then the fourth element, or the second that underpins competence, is results. Delivering results. Because, look at particularly the private sector, but of course with the public sector, the work that we do, you've got to get after stuff, you've got to achieve it. Sometimes time is money, and in private organisations they expect high returns and at quick pace. But is that individual, are they trustworthy? Can they be trusted because they're achieving stuff? And I thought this was really tidy. it's broken down furthermore into, if you look at capability, for example, there are 3 more points under that, which, alluded to on the slide, knowledge, skills, and experience in order to be capable. Under character and integrity, it's got, authentic, that person is authentic. They are true to themselves. They're easy to, therefore, can be trusted. They are consistent. So I really liked it, and hence I share it with you. And I started looking at issues and problems that might arise and might have arisen, and start to realise that actually you can, if there's a deficit in performance. I did a job in assurance where we'd go around, visit lots of locations across the army and look at what worked well, what needed to be improved, how we could help. And we saw it as kind of free consultancy. A key takeaway was no one, unless they're a devious weasel, gets out of bed to do a bad job. The reason something doesn't happen is because something has affected, has got involved. Sorry, really bad English, has got in the way. So, for example, communications were poor. It was not under the requirement was not understood. Therefore, I took it in a different direction and therefore did not realise delivering according to the intent. Or I have given this task to that individual. I had thought they were better than they were, and I thought they had the capability, but they are not experienced enough to execute the task to the right standard. So it comes down to not being trusted, but not out of malice, out of them being set up unintentionally to fail. And I think you can look at any problem and come back to me in questions, and I won't try and ditch if you can find problems that don't necessarily fit this, but it's quite tidy. Where normally the fundamental cause of the issue where it has not worked well would be that there has been a deficit in either character or competence. And if you break this down, see that. So character and competence, integrity and intent, capability and results. The reason I turned it on its side is because whilst I believe that character, if you're looking in terms of trusting somebody, that character will normally come before competence. It's based on something like positive relationships and warmth and connection, and we'll explore a couple of those in a minute. But you trust someone predicated on character first and competence later, probably. And so there's a time issue with it, and that's what's kind of articulated upwards from the roots to the top of the oak. I think it's an oak tree. Anyway, a big tree. But it infers that when tasks are being done and when people are being trusted, that first of all you trust them predicated on their character, that they've got the integrity, that they've got the the right intent, they've got the knowledge, skills, and experience to achieve the results, and that's absolutely fine, and it's already tidy. But the reality is, let's flip it. I would argue that there are a number of organisations, and I would include the army too, who demand character in their people, but perhaps reward competence. And I know there are a lot of organisations outside, particularly in the private sector, and it's easy to throw mud at bankers. Of course it is. I used to have a lot of friends with bankers. I have one or two now. But anyway, the point is that they can get after stuff and achieve it because they've got the knowledge, skills, and experience, and they're achieving results. But at what cost? And it's almost this: do the ends justify the means? And this starts to you can explore the issue of toxic leadership a bit here. That person is hugely knowledgeable, hugely skilled, hugely experienced, not necessarily evidencing the right behaviours or going about the task in the right way, but he or she have absolutely delivered, to time and spec again and again and again. So, arguably they are being trusted, but they're being trusted as being competent people, but not necessarily but going about it the right way with integrity and intent, and bad behaviours and narcissistic ways, and that may be fine. But that will erode fairly quickly over time. And I two of my very good friends were chief of staff to a brigade commander who is no longer notoriously was a notorious toxic leader, and they were both to a person broken because they were achieving lots. The tempo was high, getting after lots of stuff. Much was expected and demanded, but the team were getting broken because there was poor character and a lack of consideration in morale terms and well-being of those in the staff. So I flipped the tree on its side because I wanted to be crystal clear that you can achieve results, but it can be to the detriment of sound character. And for me, character trumps competence every single time, because if you're a decent leader and you're genuinely interested in those in your team, you can bring them on, you can mentor them, you can nurture them, you can coach them. They can get better. You know, I hate the term, but you can't polish a turd. You know, if someone's awful, it's a lot more difficult to really turn them around. Awful analogy. I apologise, but it's what came to mind. There's a lot in that. Yeah. We'll move on. Next slide, please. Yeah. So a couple of 2 or 3 vignettes, and I think making sure I'm on honour about time. I wouldn't wish the grandstand. Hopefully you're still with me. Actually, the person in the devilishly handsome, slightly small chap in the second row in the green, in the dead centre is me. And I've got quite a lot of military photos up in the house because I'm proud of being in the ETS and proud of being in the army, or very proud of that. And I think my daughter and my son said, yeah, so Daddy, are you very important because you're always either in the front or in the middle and in the front? Yeah, has zero to do with the fact that I'm 5'6" in heels. But yes, I'm very, very important. A slight digression. This is a photo of the end of a course called Rowan and Company. Rowan and Company has since been replaced by Slim Company, and actually there's an ETS platoon command who's OC of Slim Company at the moment. And it's a leadership development course that you do at Sandhurst prior to starting the commissioning course. Now, anyone who has got the stag emblem, the blue sweatshirt, the yellow stag, which is all about the proper Rowan and Company badge, are those who did a 12-week course after having gone through RCB or AOSB as it would be now. And on your report, it says, congratulations, you have passed. You have a Rowan and Company pass. So I thought, brilliant, I passed. What's Rowan and Company? You get sent a video, VHS, this is how old it was. It was a Betamax, but it's pretty old. And it all is, it's people in fairly dodgy knee-length pest trousers, long socks, walking in the hills with burgers and smiles on their faces. I thought, that looks pretty good. So I was going to get paid to do that for 12 weeks. No one tells you what it really is, because actually, if they told you what it really is, you wouldn't have turned up. And when you arrive on this course, and it's about, you then need to find out, it is about character development, and on there is a quote, character is the bedrock on which the whole edifice of leadership rests, and that's from the Army Leadership Doctrine. But when you arrive there, and I was foolishly early, arrived at the train station, got picked up, myself and this guy called Lucy, his surname was Lucy, we weren't allowed first names. We weren't even allowed officer cadets, we were cadets, mostly surnames. We arrived early. I was then getting told off pretty much for being early, and I was in a press-up position for quite a while in a jacket and tie for longer than I care to remember. You can kind of guess how this 12 weeks was. But they tell you quite early on as to why you got Rowan and Company, and it's normally deficits in character. You're spectacularly woeful in a number of areas. In my case, it was they questioned my commitment, and I thought, to be fair, I thought I did quite well at RCB, so maybe I was deluded and not particularly self-aware. But it turned out that I was asked a question about what was I going to do if I wasn't successful, and I was going to go to Australia and teach rugby, hockey, and tennis. It's what I was going to do. I wasn't going to beat myself up about it. They played quite heavily on that, and I sort of dug in a little bit, and I said, well, I've got a plan B, and if it doesn't work, they didn't think I was committed enough. The fact that I was sponsored by the Gunners for 5 years, have done X number of visits to the infantry, I've done my Marine Protection Officer course. I was a bit of a military shit. So I was really wanting to do this. But clearly Kettle didn't shine particularly well at Westbury, or as well as he might have. So I got the road code. There were people who were arrogant, who were a bit meek, who lacked, weren't particularly fit. So it had all types. And there was one guy, a guy called Nick, who did commission into the ETS, who got, it's weird when you're laughing to yourself, but there we go. Who got Rowan and Company, he got a Roco pass because he had a saloon bar attitude to women. And that was on his report. He was quite proud of that. Not of actually having a saloon bar attitude, but the fact he's got that written in writing on the report. You'll appreciate the difference. Anyway, so we're all on this course, and it's about character development. And the long and short of it is, we had 12 weeks, no program. We didn't know what was happening from one day to the next. We were in barrack rooms of 12 to 14. There were 2 platoons in its entirety. We started with 58, 59. We ended up with however many you can count on there, about 24. So it was quite high attrition. Mobile phones you weren't allowed, and clear it would be an integrity issue if anyone tried tried to hide them in the, in those ceilings behind the roof panels. Really, no one did that. And it was, you just burnt up huge amounts of anxious energy in calories in angst and worry, not crying sob worry, but just, I think, this heightened state of alertness, because you never knew when they were going to come in and you're going to get taken outside and to do some exercise and sent on exercise. You just didn't have a clue what was going on. But it was the most amazing experience to realize that your body can push, your mind will take you far further than you think your body can. But front and center was, you became utterly reliant on those to your left and right. Whether it's dropping off at the Brecon Beacons, you haven't been doing nav for that long, and all of a sudden you're doing sort of navigating through the Brecon Beacons at night in January with you and a mate for the best part of 8 to 9 hours. And you trusted each other implicitly. And whilst I would be really foolish to ever suggest it was anything like the buddy system in SEALs training, there are some similarities. But please let me place that in context. I'm not saying it's that. It was pretty hard. It was pretty rigorous, and there's a lot of kudos for having got through it. But it was the break you down. Make sure that you realise that the team is stronger than the individual, that you know who your partner is, know who your buddy is, who you're bashing up with, and look after them at all times. Really was loud and clear. And so you left that course. If you're arrogant, being humbled, if you were meek, gaining in confidence, if you weren't fit, you were a lot fitter. If you weren't committed, I don't necessarily think I was more committed because I wanted to join the army, but I was probably fitter. I was certainly fitter, and got a lot from it in terms of character development, and it's probably still the thing I'm probably most proud of. So I'm banging on about it now. But yeah, trust, fundamental. Those people, and I think we've lost a little bit in army training now. We've broken people up and they have one-person rooms, and I know in units they struggle in that collective ethos, that collective identity, that working together. And those of you in OTCs, when you go on annual camp, being in barrack room blocks, it's bar none the best time you'll have, I think, as good as the training is. So again, referring back to James Kerr, there are other books, but collective character is vital to success. Focusing on getting the culture right, the rest will follow. And I think in most jobs, whilst there are always frictions in relationships, I've tried to work hard at, not always got it right, admittedly, getting the right culture. And I forget that famous quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think it's so important. But if you've got low trust, the culture's going to be really poor. Next slide, please. Yeah, it is a bit self-indulgent. There is a photo of me again on the left-hand side. But it's not all about me. Please don't think it. I do have some humility and some EQ. But I'm that, again, that devilishly handsome small person who probably should be a couple down to the right. I don't quite know why I'm there, but I have ideas of grandeur. And I came across that just in a Sandhurst image, and really good friends to the left and right. A couple of those are commanding officers now. One, Mark, two up from me on the right hand side is CO2 para, 3 para, sorry. Matt, next to him, this side is my brother-in-law, he's CO 15 Signal Regiment. So there's a lot there. I won't name drop every single person, but great people. I went to Sandhurst having done Royal Island Company, and I don't mind admitting that it was a bit of it was slightly disappointing having done Royal Island Company, because we were so fit, so confident, very able, very capable. You're told to forget it, never mention the R word again, yet we arrived on the nominal roll that we had, Ketra in brackets R. You're not going to forget that one. You're not going to get that monkey off your back. And I was really proud of having done it. It meant that I was assigned 3 overseas cadets to help, during the initial days of Sandhurst, and goodness me, that kept me busy. But we arrived, and I had a company sergeant major in the Grenadier Guards. Now, my last experience I've been on attachment with the Coldstream Guards. One of the colour sergeants on the Royal Island Company was Colour Sergeant Elms, known as Dutch Elms, for obvious reasons. He was brutal and amazing, all in at the same time. And we had a guy called Colour Sergeant Alf Higgins, and I was expecting, very tall, very shouty, like drill and loved bullying, nothing like a stereotype. And he just was the utter antithesis. And he had this quite, gravelly voice. He swore quite a lot, but not in a nasty way. It was, it was just, it filled gaps. But I was stunned how he treated us. It was almost like, this is what I want you to do. Just do it. It's quite simple. I'm not going to get annoyed. I'm not going to get upset. But we'll all get on if you just do what I ask of you at the right time. You'll learn better, and you won't look like those idiots, running outside doing show parades and sweeping up the parade square. And do you know what? He was amazing. He was calm. He was considered. He was very approachable. He was gentle, but he had an edge, and that which made him even more credible. And by the end of first term, we were head and shoulders clear on what's called the Sovereign's Banner competition. So that's like the best platoon at Sandhurst. Now, as good as we thought we were, to other people, and it's always good to view things from the other side of the hill, we had too much swagger. We were a little bit arrogant. That was their perception. We were surf platoon in a surf company, and it was all a bit easy. And that's the reason. The reason we were doing really, really well is because they were up all night doing bullying parades. And even then the penny dropped that, well, what if it's having a deficit or a detrimental effect in terms of performance, let's look at methods and approaches and our ways. But anyway, that was probably less. But we started the second term. We had to say goodbye to Colour Sergeant Higgins, who was later Sergeant Major at Sandhurst, and we then had a new guy, Colour Sergeant, who was amazing, Gordon Clark. At the time, I didn't think it, if I'm being truthful. And I caught up with him in Bosnia about 2.5 years later, and he utterly destroyed us in the first 2 weeks. It was show parade every day, and he'd been in the other company and had a look at us, and I think thought we'd got above our station. We were only going into this. We were far from commission, and we needed to come down a peg or two. And do you know what? Whilst the intent was sound, the impact was terrible. We frustrated. We started getting a bit shouty at each other. There were frictions. There were fissures. It was all a bit tedious, and I don't think the platoon commander helped. He was, not there a lot, conspicuously absent in certain times, and would beast us quite heavily. And then when he was going to shower, we'd check enough berg and it had a sleeping bag in it. Those sort of things that you did when you didn't trust somebody. And long story short, got to middle of seniors, and we were absolutely spectacularly bottom of the Sovereign's Banner. And it was, it's not a huge takeaway in terms of trust, but there was a takeaway in terms of environment and setting the conditions and creating the environment to succeed. And if you feel that someone has got your back and has got your best interests and trusts you to do the right thing, you're less inclined to mess up because you don't want to disappoint them. If, on the other hand, and I absolutely don't think Colour Sergeant Clark was like this, it was certainly early days that it appeared that way, but I couldn't have been more grateful to the support he gave us when it came to commissioning. It had such a detrimental effect in terms of our performance and the gelling and the bonding of the platoon for a good while that the ways had to be questioned. That was Sandhurst. This is not going to be every posting. The next one is the Army Apprenticeship College in Arborfield. Now, I did my first posting to the Education Centre Tidworth. I'd gone to Bosnia on an operational tour. I was the effectively education officer for Welsh Guards and then the Royal Scots, but I'd gone effectively deployed as an education officer embedded with the battalion. But then they then realised I could speak Serbo-Croat, Serbian, and therefore I did some interpreting with my officer and all sorts of stuff, and it was great. I came back having had a lot of responsibility into Arborfield to be a platoon commander, and I had my arrivals interview with the commanding officer. And I was going to put a picture up of Paul Daniels on the slide, but I didn't think it was appropriate. And the reason that was because he was a spitting image of Paul Daniels. I said I'm not tall, he was even shorter than me. But actually, he was an absolute weasel. He said, and I've got to use my terminology carefully here because it was particularly nice to be said. But imagine, arrival interview, I'd done okay, I'd been on tour, I was coming back, 15 commander, arrival interview, I came in, so if I sit down, no, you won't be here long. I thought I was in trouble. And he then said, I have 3 things for thee. I have 3 things for thee, Ketterer, thee, from Henry VIII. And he said, first one, In this college, no, there are 4 things. We had 3 things. The first thing he said, in this college, I am king and I am on pot star wages, which I thought was an interesting introduction. And when you think about warmth, I didn't immediately warm to that that element. However, he was the commanding officer, so he was king. He said, I have 3 things for thee. And he said, the first one is platoon commanders are the weakest link. Okay, that doesn't bode well. He said the second one, he said, mess up. He was a bit more rude than that. Mess up and I will fire thee. Again, fond of thee, a sort of an ancient term in language. And the third one was, it was again a very unpleasant turn of phrase, but effectively stay away from the female recruits. And this was a junior college of 16 and 17-year-olds, and I was pretty irritated by this. And anyone who knows me will recognise that my body language is poor. I do not have a face for poker, and people can read me like a book, but that's fine. I'm simple and it's easy that way. I have not got much better at it, but I do try. And I thought this was brutal. And then that was it. He said, "Okay, you're done. Out you go." And I thought, it's a video camera. Is this, Big Brother? Is it what's going on here? And as time went on, I'd gone out to companies as platoon commander, and there was the morale was through the floor in the college. The RSM was swept up with the commanding officer's kind of ethos and culture. The training officer was a late entry officer who I personally thought was a bully. And the commanding officer would do things like, challenge you to a run if you weren't fit. So he would pick on certain people. He would wanted the platoon commanders to get beasted on exercise before they assumed appointment because he didn't trust them. And then the section commanders within the platoons were treated like school children on a really tight leash, and no freedom of action, no freedom of maneuver. And it was the most suffocating of cultures, because it was just, he didn't trust people. He didn't want anyone else to mess up, recognizing that it came with risks, as a junior entry college. And as a platoon commander, pretty much pond life, and in his eyes, the weakest link, and that was horrendous. There are lots of anecdotes that come out of that, but conscious of time, I won't indulge in them there. Safe to say, the difference when a new commanding officer came in was phenomenal. It was like a beacon of light shone on those gates. Trust was, the cloud was lifted. People were trusted. People were employed based on ability, and respected based on their experience and that which they were employed to do, and were largely left to get on with it, as opposed to checking your arts and continue thinking you were being checked up on or spied on. It was horrendous. It leads to a point by Professor Amy Cuddy. She's a Harvard Business School professor, and she wrote a book called Presence. And I touched on body language earlier. And when I was a junior major, no, I was a senior major actually. I'd finished subunit command. I went to take over a job, and I worked for someone. And I had my arrival interview with the second reporting officer. This person came on the server, so it's fine. Although I was fairly outspoken shortly after it anyway. And I had the arrival interview, and it was a bit like the one with the commanding officer. It was a bit full on. It was a bit, you've been in subunit command, you've had it easy, now you can come on the staff and you can do a real job. I was a bit miffed because I've been short-toured out of subunit command. It's a real privilege to command as a major, and I've got taken out of it early to return to the staff. And it was full on, and it was like interrogation. And 3 weeks later, the same person asked to do 180-degree feedback. She'd been around a defence strategic leaders course, and we were there. The SO2 community, so the majors, were asked to complete the number of questions. So I duly obliged and answered the questions, put it in a brown envelope, gave it to her PA, her personal administration staff. So I've just seen something come from the screen. And thought nothing of it. A week later, I was called in and said, "Matt, can I have a word with you?" I said, "Of course you can." So in I went. And she said, "I've been reading through your comments on 180-degree feedback." And she said, "Can you please explain what you mean by my arrival interview was like being waterboarded?" And I thought, this isn't going to go well. You can be too honest, and you can be too straight. And actually, I was pretty naive in writing that. I assumed someone was going to be, as what should happen, interpret the information and provide a gentle list of counsel so that people kind of understand what it was. Anyway, the long debrief was, I clearly wasn't particularly impressed, and I was told I had horrendous body language. And I don't think it really changed, because I was pretty miffed. Anyway, conscious I needed to do something about it. I read this book called Presence, and it's by Amy Cuddy, and it is about body language, but it's also about first impressions. And she talks about two things that are fundamental in the first impression. The first one is trust. You know, having that warmth, having that compassion, that empathy, that ability to connect. We'll talk about connecting a bit. And the second bit is respect. That either you are respected and you respect. It's a two-way path, and largely linked with competence. And it's really interesting seeing those points resonate. You know, what we looked into Stephen Covey's book in The Speed of Trust about, you know, character and competence, and what she's saying in terms of body language, and hugely important. Often, you know, there's no such thing as I forgot the term, so that's not very good, is it? Anyway, you don't get a second chance of making a good first impression. I think that's what I meant to say. And I think there's a lot in that. And whether it's the firm handshake, the looking someone in the eye, and a smile, little things like that can make a real difference, as opposed to, you know, sensors are out if there's something that looks slightly at odds. Anyway, so yeah, amazing, trusting environment, first term, less so second term, impact in terms of performance, and then a low trust environment, toxic culture, impact on performance, impact on morale, impact on well-being, and what happens when that gets lifted. Early days. Next slide, please. More pictures. There you go. So 20 years on, I know you look old enough. First impressions always stuck with me. Can I trust this person? Can I respect this person? I think it's really, really good. Excuse me. I rely quite heavily on my gut. When I was in Afghanistan, I was trawled out of commanding officer at EMU, and I ended up about 7 months in Afghanistan, as Richard introduced, advising the first Deputy Minister of the Interior, and that's the guy on the bottom left of the slide. He was the first Deputy Minister of the Interior. I was employed to be his senior advisor. Bear in mind, his remit included counter-crime, counter-terrorism, counter-security, counter-narcotics. And you know, I was an army officer, predicated on learning and development. You know, I've done ACSC, so staff course, Major Lieutenant Colonel. I was into defence studies. I had a master's in it, but I was no expert on that which he was responsible for. I was slightly nervous about how am I going to get up to speed on this, and you know, admittedly, the flight over, because it was quite a short flash to bang from being told to deploying. The flight over wasn't going to make me an expert in you know, counter-crime, counter-security, and counter-terrorism, counter-narcotics as well. But anyway, I did quite a lot of work on leadership assessments, because when we were looking at advising into the ministry, we were assigned to individuals and, you know, and a number of individuals. And I started doing some work about how we may wish to assess their leadership better, to work out whether they were, you know, a keeper or needed to be removed or needed, you know, mentorship. And there were sort of 5 areas I looked at. Character, are they of sound character? Competence, are they, you know, can they do the job? It's ministerial level, have they got their, you know, skills at being able to do that in their country? Culture, what is the environment that determines whether they will or will not be effective? Committed, are they invested in the country? So he, you know, General Abdul Sabul Khane his family were in France. He's, you know, from Afghanistan. He was head of the NDS in Kabul. Was he personally invested and utterly committed to Afghanistan? Question mark. And how connected? How well connected are they? That's how it works in Afghanistan. If you're connected, you will be looked after. Things will happen. If you're not connected, good luck. You go nowhere. So we use those 5 areas. But actually, as I looked at those, I thought how important they were in terms of establishing a relationship with him, because you know, to have his trust and to trust him, but particularly to have his trust. You know, I was there for at the time for 6 months. And it was 4 weeks before I got in to see him, and he was really, really busy. And I got to see him initially for the first couple of weeks 3 times a week. And there was, you know, it was a big portfolio. There's a lot to get after, and so I needed to prove pretty quickly that I was of sound character and I was highly competent, and I also understood their ways, culture, and kind of respected them. And I worked very, very hard to ensure that I was trusted by him. He absolutely tested me very early on to see if he should indeed trust me. He gave me a couple of tasks. I found out certain things from left field and from other people I was working with, that he was digging into a number of things that I've worked for. He was checking up on some of my advice. And once it landed, we got on brilliantly. And after about 3 weeks, you know, we had absolutely connected. And so connection for me has been really, really important. It's that ability to tune into, engage with, empathize with, understand that person And it's a fundamental element of leadership. So whilst connection there was about being connected physically in Afghanistan with people in network sense, I mean in the emotional sense, being emotionally connected. It's so, so important. And we just harvested, high trust. Everything happened really, really quickly. I just needed to say stuff, and it was really, really quick. Interesting, his guy behind him looked about 18 at the time, and he was always immaculately dressed. And I referred to him as Scarface because he had a big desk and a massive great chair. He looked really young, and the only thing he was missing was, huge lines of coke on his desk and a machine gun. And we got on really, really well. But I soon realised that I had to, it's important to impose my will and ingratiate myself with his surrounding team because they were his counsel and he listened to them. And I worked, quite hard in the waiting room, building rapport with them. So the importance of establishing, positive relationships is key. The issue on the second part on the right-hand side is when I was head of Special Training Division in Iraq last year, and that's a picture with one of the major generals. But I was actually advising the 3-star within the Ministry of Defence responsible for trading, predominantly, education and training really. And I took a lot from that which I'd learned in Afghanistan about ensuring first impressions, keeping to promises, doing what I said I would do, and keeping them informed, but also recognizing what they expected, what mattered to them in order to trust people. And from Iraq's perspective, you would have far greater effect if you were, you were Western, but particularly if you're British, and if you were American, but particularly British. If you were a product of our staff system, because they're very focused on their staff college, very proud of their staff college. Third, if you could, if your English was very good, and you could speak a bit of Arabic, but certainly your English had to be very good. Fourth, if you had been to Iraq before. And fifth, that you were advising from an area of competence. And I was really lucky that I've been to Iraq in 2007. I ticked all those boxes. And for me, it was just really, really, things happened very easily. For contemporaries of mine, there's a Turkish brigadier who I kind of replaced, who was, forget the political situation in that, Iraq, the Ministry of Defense are going to be questioned advice they're being given by Turkey, given the political, standoff that was going on in Iraq at the time, and continues to that sort of untrustworthy nature based on what's happening in the north of the country. And then we had a number of others on the NATO mission who couldn't speak particularly good English, it's their second language, so that's understood. Didn't necessarily come from a training or military education background, hadn't been to Iraq before, and for them, everything which took longer, they needed more resource to unlock and unpick. And therefore, in terms of to be trusted on operations and overseas on certain advisory tasks, it's incumbent upon you to understand the culture in particular ways, not get absolutely fixed on them, but prove your competence and your character from doing things the right way. But above all, I believe it comes down to human characteristics and your ability to connect with someone. I think if you take away anything, that leadership is like teaching, and I wrote a paper for the Centre for Leadership a bit about this, that if you were to think about a good teacher during your time, good teachers are those, or you consider them good teachers because they were passionate about their subject, they knew what they were talking about, they understood how best to communicate the detail to you. They probably inspired you in a particular way, they took an interest in you, they understood you, and perhaps where other people didn't. And certainly the good teachers that I think about ticked all those boxes. But I would challenge that, or assert it's absolutely the same for proficient leaders. Think about a good leader. What made them a good leader? They understood you, they trusted you, you trusted them, they were competent, they took the time to get to know you, they were interested in you, they had your best interests at heart, they were passionate about what they did, but they wanted to bring you on. And so leaders are teachers, teachers are leaders. It comes out very loudly in the Legacy book by James Kerr. And I would say that as as an army officer and a teacher, and hopefully a proficient leader. That sounds a bit arrogant, but please don't take it with the intent that it's meant. That those things are really, really important. If you cannot connect with those in your care and those under your tutelage, it's a dereliction of duty in terms of leadership, and it's certainly you're going to fail as a teacher. It goes back to that unifying purpose of inspiring others to succeed. Good. Next slide, please. I think we could perhaps pick this up in questions, and because it's very self-explanatory. But the guy called Will Meddings, who's working for the Centre for Army Leadership, has set up the Army Leaderhood sort of blog, websites, and they've done a lot of articles and collated a lot of stuff across the Army. And one of the things they did, and I think this is great for you to sort of go away, read, reflect on, make some comments about, was some research they did, and they interviewed a multitude of officers across the Army, but particularly at the OC level. And the principal research question was, what are the most important factors that lead subunit commanders to trust their subordinate platoon or troop commanders? And I think the findings will prove interesting. The first bit was, does the platoon commander have the right intentions, and are they acting for the best of the organisation? So it firmly sits in with the character domain. Selfless, understanding what's happening above, at 1 and 2 up, fundamental within mission command. Owning up to mistakes, I absolutely encourage failing. It's, some say it's the first attempt in learning, but be allowed to fail, but fail once in that particular thing and learn quickly. But not being able to fail creates a pretty stifling and unpleasant culture. But also to be reliable when you're away from the commander and out of sight, do the right thing at the right time on a difficult day. I think that's key. The second bit was, are they competent? Do they have the right skills, knowledge, and attributes for the job? That comes with time, and you don't have that immediately, but you've got to work at that, particularly as a junior officer. You've got to be good at nav, you've got to be fit, you've got to know tactics, depending on your role, of course. For me, it was doing all those things because it's officer first, and then for me, educator second. And then knowing all the material and knowing about the importance of good quality teaching, good quality learning, what it is to have impact within the classroom, but also to develop those out in the units. The third bit, do we have full and open communications? Are they willing to approach the OC? The OC has a responsibility to prepare, and also to challenge. I think that's all well and good for a young officer, but the OC has to set the conditions and the culture and the climate in order to allow that to happen. We talk about psychological safety, and Amy Edmonton's written quite a lot about that. But you have to feel comfortable in order to raise an issue, irrespective of the OC. The major has set those, believes he or she has set those conditions. And the final bit is, what do others think? Do they believe you are trustworthy? And that sounds a little bit digging deep and spying to the bushes, but it's reputation matters, and other opinions matter. So you can kind of benchmark and then sort of triangulate the findings. But I share them for what it's worth. The bit on the right-hand side, a point from Stephen Covey's book as to how to increase high-trust environments. There's a quote on the right from Dick Costello, the CEO of Twitter, which again is fairly self-explanatory, but it follows that we should perhaps finish with Slim, who talks about leadership is just plain you, and being authentic really matters. And the fact if you're not yourself and you're not being true to yourself, you're therefore imitating. And like he says on the slide, imitations are rarely masterpieces. I think that's pretty much us. There's one more slide, I think. I've got totally out of kilter. No, sorry, next slide, please. You've seen that. I was just going to reinforce that. And this is just, again, a number of books, all on my shelf that I think relate to leadership, relate to trust, relate to high-performing teams, relate to creating psychological safety, that environment where it's encouraged to challenge, to voice opinions, to voice your concerns, and also about vulnerability, and often misinterpreted as something that's a bit soft and a bit weak. But actually, it starts with the leader. If the leader is willing to say, do you know what, I need help, or I don't understand that, or this is my Achilles heel, and please help, then you've got to be a bit of a cold-hearted person not to want to lean in and support them. Even if they were that commanding officer who I utterly despise the world for, not that I've got over it. And the last bit is quite telling actually when you look at subject material. There are 4 snapshots on the right hand side, and I googled the top 20 TED talks or TEDx talks. I'm sure many of you are familiar, but there's always a good shortcut if you want to sort of background to the essence of a book. And the top 4 are those that you see on the slide on the right hand side. And number 2, 3, and 4. Number 2 is Amy Cuddy, who I spoke to you about presence and the importance of first impressions in body language, so warmth and competence. Then there's Simon Sinek, who you've heard a lot about. He wrote Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last, which is there on the slide, and is a cracking book. Talks about circle of safety. The the link there is actually how do great leaders inspire, and he talks about they start with why. Unify through a common purpose, show them being utterly visionary and helping them, but those in your care buy into the vision and to want to join you on the journey. He said there's a reason that why Martin Luther King said, I have a dream as opposed to I have a plan. And the third one is Brené Brown, who wrote Daring Greatly and Dare to Lead, and she talks about the power of vulnerability, this concept of disarmoring. That if you keep your armor up, you profess to know all and being right all the time. Whereas daring leadership, you disarmor, you're willing to learn, and you're keen to get it right. So I share those for what they're worth, and I think we're now on to 8:10, not too bad, on to questions. Is that right, Jamie, for the next slide? Doesn't really matter what's up next, but I think it's good time for questions. Yeah, thoughts. Lots there. I've talked a lot. Hopefully some of it lands. Hopefully somebody is still with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Colonel. There's been lots and lots of questions and interest there has been generated during your presentation. I'm going to start with my first question, and it's going right back to the beginning of your presentation, where you mentioned your degree in Russian and Serbian, and the question there was, what opportunities have you been able to take advantage of because of your degree in Russian and Serbian?
Yeah, okay, really good question. So I went to Nottingham. I looked at, when I was going to look at university, I looked at, I did Russian history and French A-level. I was kind of happy I could speak French, relatively okay. I loved history, and I thought Russian was really, really useful. And I looked at universities. I was looking at Exeter, and I was looking at war studies and Russian at King's. And I found Nottingham had Russian Serbo-Croat. This was a long time ago, admittedly, but it was 1994. Bosnia was I say live and kicking, and I was going to join the army. And I thought, wow, that would be amazing. Russian Serbo-Croat. Joined it, and they had an HR management system which tracked what you had, and for some reason it had me down as Russian politics, and people didn't realize I actually spoke Serbo-Croat, although I fundamentally flawed in it now 20 years down the line. But I had the opportunity when I was in Bosnia to speak it and to teach it and to do some interpreting. I've had those skills assessed, but the reality is I've not used it anywhere near as much as I thought I would, and that was partly because there were jobs that I wanted to do, and at the time I did not want to get stuck in a rut and be a linguist. I wanted to be quite generous. I found the ETS had the Education Training Service had so much to offer, and there's so many things I wanted to do, and so I kind of dipped my toe in a bit of languages, and they did a language audit, and I was one of 2 or 3 Serbo-Croat speakers and a handful of Russian speakers. Although my languages, I'll be the first to admit that they're not particularly good now. So I've not used them as much. There have been opportunities, but I've just taken my risk in a slightly different way. If you are a linguist, and there are oodles of opportunities to perhaps go a bit deeper, and certainly operationally, depending on the nature of the language, they're fine after people using them.
Thank you, Colonel. There's another language question, and it's specifically about Russian. And in your
Russian,
opinion,
is it? I might struggle.
Not from me.
Okay.
So yeah, with regards, sort of having knowledge of Russian language and Russian culture, how important do you think that's going to be for a new army career going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Russian is one of the key languages. I think it's one of 4 now, and it changes over time. We had a time where we were looking really closely at Dari and Farsi, and Spanish was very in vogue. But I think Russian, Spanish, Mandarin, French, and there's a couple of African sort of dialects which are becoming, what we call I think it's tier 1 languages. Those that we're really focusing on. And I think it would be foolish to suggest it isn't important and that it's not growing in importance. The question is how we choose to use it, and also I think how we choose to grow that language capability. Because I'm not necessarily convinced we perhaps do it the right way. Personally, believe the best way to go and learn languages is to go deep and go in embed. I learned it. I came on the most spending of time in Yaroslavl, where I got whisked off to with a load of students, friends, we went out there on maths, and we then, lived with different families. And we were supposed to meet up in town, and I got whisked off to the Datcha to those wooden summer houses in the woods. And, got beaten with a Viennica, a birch branch, and, drinking vodka and jumping on icicle lakes. And I learned, it was a bit of a scary experience, to be perfectly honest, and my goodness me, the whipping hurt. Some people pay for it. But I learned a lot about, my language really came on. And I think sitting in a classroom continue, as important as that is, and you could do better by, give them a project, let them dig into the cultural side, look into the social political system, and learn language, and then you'll come back far better, because culture, to understand culture, you need to know language, really, and to understand language, you need to know culture. I think we come hand in hand. So there are opportunities, and I think Russian is, anyone who says yes, Russian is losing its importance is probably barking now.
Thank you. Another question right at the beginning of the presentation, and this is to do with your the time that you spent with the UOTC. And the question from the participant was, is there anything that surprised you or maybe exceeded your expectations when you were working with the OTC?
That's quite broad. It's a great question.
It is.
Yeah. If they were in the room, I'd say, can you be a bit more pointed? What actually do you mean? Okay, sorry, there were two elements to that question, weren't there?
There were. So was there anything that surprised you or maybe exceeded your expectations?
Yeah, there's loads of exceeded. I was at Nottingham, I studied at Nottingham, and I put something on the EMEOTC Association, I think, the other day, thinking about my time there. And it was amazing. And I played a lot of rugby, so I opted out of the OTC because I was going to join the army. And I went, my first dinner night as commanding officer, I think I said, and we'll actually, James Malloy and others will tell you, I think he's on the call, will say whether I did or not. But I'm pretty sure, I spoke to a friend of mine called Simon Harris Ward, who was, I referred to him as a bit of an OTC shit when I was at university. It's what he ever spoke about. But it wasn't until I joined the OTC as commanding officer that I absolutely got why he was so passionate about it, because I just got hooked in very, very quickly. I thought there were a lot of areas that we could improve, but I actually relished those challenges because there was a great team who were keen to kind of get after those issues. The whole, its purpose, its construct, and that which it seeks to achieve is amazing. And I'm not saying that's a load of cadets on the line, but they continue to amaze me. Always getting beaten up for snowflake generation. It's utter nonsense, and every day having those in the team is a real privilege. And I don't mean that in any evangelical sense. And I think what surprised me, I was surprised that sometimes we were, training was delivered as an end in itself as opposed to a means to an end. We delivered training. Why did we deliver Mod Alpha and Mod Bravo? It was to develop leadership, but it was, we have ticked up that training objective, rather unpacking it. What's the value? And hence some of the work around what we developed as a team of called the Personal Leadership Development Plan, to help people reflect on what they're doing and being able to articulate it better, and when they went to interview or beyond. So I don't think we did that particularly well. I think we got a lot better at it, but I don't think I was surprised that not splendid mediocrity, because that sounds a bit poor, but I thought that could have been a lot better from the OTC's perspective.
Thank you. Quite a lot of the questions from the participants are really trying to, I suppose, benefit from your experience and your career in the Army. And this next question that I've got from one of the participants says, do you have any thoughts on how we can best identify with soldiers from different backgrounds? And again, it's very open.
Yeah, I do. There's a friend of mine in the ETS who wrote an article in the British Army Review, and it's called "Drink More Tea." Like with Miles Heyman, it does what it says on the tin. And I wouldn't just say people of different backgrounds. It's understanding all of those in your team, and I don't mean being exclusive. So being exclusive by focusing solely on the team, because that you will have people with different backgrounds within your team. And it links into the point about connection. You've got to find ways to understand, to empathize, to connect, to appreciate what ticks, what challenges them, what concerns them, to be able to have that relationship. And only if you don't do that, you kind of, it goes back to my point about dereliction of duty, and I do mean that quite strongly. You've got to understand people and to try and connect. Now, I had a couple of issues where I was intolerant and I didn't do it well enough. And those are, a couple of different issues. I wouldn't have, I say I was intolerant, I think I was actually quite tolerant, but there were frustrations and I chose not to dig deep to connect with a couple of individuals. So I think personally there was an issue over integrity and character and malintent, which concerned me. And I follow my gut, and I'm often right about some of those things. So it's about spending time. It's about getting away from your desk. It's about not being fixed on rank and chewing the fat in the right way. Not getting too matey, because over familiarity breeds contempt, and that's not good for an organisation such as ours. At the same time, you have to plant the seed and create the conditions to be approachable. And you can only do that if you've opened up, like I said about Brené Brown, you've dropped your shield and been shown to take an interest in those people. And I think, soldiers are another, oft-bashed cohort, but they stun me every single day with their sort of craft and their genius. But if you don't like football, you've got to take an interest in football and talk about football teams, because certainly I found as platoon commander, that was the common interest. All rugby league teams, depending on where they were from, and sport is often that sort of common ground where you can have banter and you can kind of chew the fat, and it breaks down those barriers. So find a common ground, but take the time to understand them, because I think it serves you really, really, really well. I hope that I'll answer the question.
I'm sure that plenty of people are actually busily writing notes down at this point. Yeah, and another question here, and I've written it down exactly as it was put into the Q&A. So, in your opinion, do the best leaders climb the ranks, or do you think that other qualities are more important?
The best leaders climb the ranks, or other qualities more important? So we're saying that other qualities that prevent people from climbing the ranks. Is that what we're getting at, do you think?
That was my interpretation of that question.
Yeah. So there's a lot of luck in promotion. Right place, right time, right cohort, right peer group. Your report catches the selective eye. I have a very close cohort of 5 very, very close friends in ETS, and we're all at slightly different stages. And I was very lucky with a strong wind and a report catching the eye at the right time, and it helped me get on a little bit. That said, it doesn't come without graft and work and commitment and putting in the shift. But I do think there are it's like Six suggesting that there are majors who haven't been promoted to lieutenant colonel who aren't good quality, and that would be crazy to even suggest that. And I think that there are those who would have had, would argue that they've had the absolute optimum work-life balance, that they've not not just talk about chase promotion at all, but they've perhaps specialised in an area. I interviewed a guy again from ETS last week who was leaving. He'd done 18 years, guy called Lawrence Roach, and he was a media expert. He'd worked with the ARC, he'd worked in 3D, he'd worked all on operations, 4 tours of Iraq. He knew media, but in every party there's no media. There's a ceiling in terms of the media domain, and goodness me, did he have good media skills? Did he have great communication skills? Did he have good ability to empathise, to connect, to sniff out a story and be able to write? Absolutely did. But did it mean he hit ceilings, had lowered his ceiling in terms of career progression? Yeah, he probably had. And it all depends what you want from it. If you go after and try and chase the stars, you fall short. But you might have been comfortable that you've done so trying. Versus it depends how where you set your ambition, as to whether what personal success is. Because what I consider personal success will be different to you, Joe. It'll be different to everyone else in the room. So it's a slightly political answer, but I think luck gets you some way. Talent will get you some of the way. But and there's some great quotes about that. But luck is not the preserve of rank, just as the good idea is not the preserve of rank. We'd be foolish to think they were.
Thank you. Right. We don't have any Brexit questions, but we do have some. But we do have some COVID questions.
Okay.
This is specific.
I'm not quite sure how we got. Yeah, I'm not sure how we're in COVID, but there we go.
It's specific to the sort of the everyday output of the ETS, and this question was. So, how do you think that COVID has changed the way that the ETS is operating? And going forward, do you think that there will be a lasting effect?
First question: how's it changed? I mean, the ETS are the proponents for learning and development, and the environment we have insists on good ideas, innovation, creativity, but actually not just having great ideas, but driving them to conclusion, turning them into action. And so, with the Army Leadership Development Program, Command Leadership Management courses, as were, they've been on the front foot in terms of changing that to make sure that we can still deliver those essential career courses online and through online and remote delivery, and a lot of that's through blended learning, flipped classroom, getting to learn up front, and then reinforcing it with some other aspects. And I think they've been almost not necessarily change catalysts, because it suggests none of that has ever happened before, but because they've done it quite quickly and at scale, it's had a real a sizable effect. And what it means is that it's developed a capability across the organisation that means it's again, too often used, but agile and adaptable and reactive. Because it can be, because it's done the work in considering how to operate certain courses based on the various constraints that we've got and the limitations we've got in terms of technology capability, platform, bandwidth, or whatever. So I think they've been front and centre in doing that. The questions I've asked of them next, or us next, has been to where do we take it and how do we develop it as an even greater capability across the Army? And if I could, I would place each of them in certain formations, because the disproportionate effect is quite significant that they can have because of the skill set that they have. And it doesn't really matter about rank, because it's the effect they can have. So I think that's been important. But also on the initial training side, we had a team who worked really closely on the virtual concept of the virtual platoon, going through basic training. And that was a stroke of genius and a masterpiece of all the work that came to enable individuals through separation to go through a training pipeline virtually, and that was I'm really proud of our officers, the ETS officers, doing a lot of that stuff. In terms of COVID, the question of what happens next is, I think there are new norms, aren't there? There are new ways, and we can hopefully embrace the right ones and get rid of the ones that we're not so comfortable with. I mean, I hate working at the screen continually. I hate not, seeing people and having the opportunity to reach out and chat and chew the fat and break from it. But I see it as an opportunity to evidence that, to prove that we can work from home, that we can work remotely. But actually, there's a time and a place to really want to do it. It just gives us more flexibility, I think. I would hate to think we jump back to a situation where you need to be in the office 24/7, or 5 days a week, and working hours, and to deliver the greatest effect. Because I think that's nonsense anyway. What it has shown is that those people have the opportunity to harvest during their the Einstein moment when they're most alert. So I'm an early bird. I get up very early and I can do loads before 7 o'clock. But I'm a bit rubbish later on in the evening, as you can tell now. And it gives you flexibility, so you can pick my children up from school and go and do some fizz in the middle of the day, which you could do anyway at work. But you just have that flexibility, providing you've not got back-to-back meetings and you're really fixed on the calendar side. So I see some real opportunities. I'm not being falsely positive, but I would like us to retain things that work and absolute part of the things that might work but are a bit tedious.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Another sort of ETS connected question, and this one is asking, so in your opinion, what leadership traits are important in ETS officers? And they've sort of caveated their question by saying, for example, an ETS officer wouldn't be a troop commander early on in their career. So what kind of, do you think that an ETS officer needs different traits and characteristics, or different techniques?
It's a really good question. They're all really good. I mean, there's some great questions here. So I have a slide, and actually, do you know, I don't think I have it. I think I've got it on my phone somewhere. I have it on my phone. Let me just check. Where I have, it's called the dozen. 12 is symbolic. The number 12 is symbolic for a number of reasons. I didn't start with 12 because I wanted 12, but I kind of ended up having 12 points. And that's sort of my points to the sort of fireside chats with junior officers and various things about being in the ETS. And the first point is number one. The first point on number one is officer first. The first point of bullet one is officer first. The last point of points 12 is about proficient leadership. In between, there's stuff about trust, there's stuff about connection, there's stuff about being passionate and plying your trade, but not being overly evangelical. Because it's officer first, it's fundamental that you have the leadership attributes that the Army requires, that you know what leaders are, what leaders know, what leaders do. Your knowledge may differ. You may not have as deep a knowledge as an infantry in the ways of executing activities at platoon and company level, although you'd be expected to do it when you go to staff college and understand how it comes together. But your professional knowledge will require you not only to be credible within the Army construct, so you can understand how it fits and how to add value, but within your particular area, about international relations and some of the stuff that we've kind of unpacked here a bit today. So I always fear, but I question anyone who suggests that, if you're an officer, you're an officer. Your trade is second, and yet if you're not a good leader, you're not a good officer. And if you're not bringing people on, you're not a good officer. If you're not developing your knowledge, you're not a good officer. If you're not having the effect and engaging, you're not a good officer. It's all those good things, and it comes down to good, not old-fashioned, but leadership that's proven over the test of time. So it's not a get-out. I would. It goes back to my point about leaders and teachers. Teachers are leaders. A good teacher is a good leader, and I do think it is as straightforward as that. Happy to. It's a shame that people can't come back in this forum, because I'd love to have those discussions. But read James Kerr. Read that book, and you can see that book there. It's really good. There's a great section on learning and character and all sorts of stuff.
And that leads me really nicely onto the next question. Perfect. So you've mentioned James Kerr, and also I think it's John Adair is a great person to add to your reading list as well. And I personally agree with you that that 30-page leadership doctrine booklet is a brilliant read. I've got it saved on my laptop anyway. The question was. What leadership books would you recommend? And I thought, rather than give a whole list, that you could maybe just suggest 3 definite reads for everybody. Okay,
so they're on that slide there.
Yeah.
I was choosing 3. I choose. Like a cake shop. Right, I tell you what I would do. I'm going to show you 5. I'm going to show you 5 for a reason. There are 4 musts, and there's an either or. Team of Teams, Stan McChrystal talks about networks, shared understanding, group consciousness, and thoughts of empowerment. It's really, really good. People get put off because it's quite small writing. My eyes have got worse over time, but it's great. James Kerr Legacy, lots of reasons. And actually, if you want to get soldiers into reading about stuff that's obvious but is written well, that's a fabulous book. Culture Code hit me in the face. It was that good, and it talks about sharing vulnerability, building, create a sense of belonging, unifying through purpose, and sort of sharing vulnerability, and what creates a great culture. There's lots of stuff in there. It looks at SEAL training. It looks at PITSAR. It looks at lots of little case studies. There's so much in there and it really caused me to write lots of notes and really reflect. Fourth one, Simon Sinek's 3 books, Infinite Game, Start With Why, and Leave As It Last. Leave As It Last talks a lot about circle of safety and links in with psychological safety. and it's very character focused in condition setting. And then I'd go either or, because there's some, Amy Edmondson, Fearless Organisation. We've not signed these books, and Brené Brown on Dare to Lead. And actually, if you want a sort of a brief foray into them, go onto TED Talks and go, Amy Edmondson, Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, Danica No, and Stan McChrystal has done one as well. But and you can always get those summary guides as well. But I would start, if you're starting with one, go for Legacy, Leads It Last, Culture Code, and then start sort of diverging slightly into some of the others. Hopefully that helps.
Definitely. I think some of those might get mentioned at AOSB briefings now.
They should, yeah.
Yes, actually, and that leads me on, because there are quite a few questions to do with AOSB. The first one I'm going to pick up here.
But I didn't do very well, so I'm probably not the person to ask. I will try and answer it then.
I am going to ask, because I think it's only fair when people have put these questions to you. So the first one here is, do you think that AOSB are looking for particular character traits, or are they looking more for the potential that can be developed at Sandhurst?
Yeah, so there's a line, and I forget, I clearly knew it word for word as a C of the ATC, but it was effectively developing the potential. Effectively, the individual who, following a year's 44 weeks training at Sandhurst, is able to undertake the command platoon or troop, and that's what it seeks to do. So it's looking at potential. It's not looking at finished product. That said, if you go there as an 18-year-old, there's more chance to, seeing the point about General McChrystal, great point. I did ask if Chris Fussels was going to tag team, who is this kind of chief of staff and has written about one mission, and clearly he's not, but hopefully he would be good as well. Sorry, the point about so if you're slightly younger, you come with less risk because you're more malleable, you're easy to shape. If you go at 25 or 26, you're more you are who you are. Yes, you can change. Yes, you can be more receptive, but you're more resistant unintentionally to change. And so there's a focus there as to someone who's 18 has probably could have a better chance of showing more potential than someone who's 25. There's more is expected of that individual. There is a standard. There is a view at the same time, which I recognise, and I don't have Sandhurst group on my arms anymore, but I'll probably get smacked for saying that that OTCs have been viewed or judged more harshly, and there were some discussions about are they prepared? Do they get prepared for? We've got a great relationship. I think Sandhurst Group is good that AOSB is part of it within the ATCs, and I think there's a real good common sort of understanding of who does what. But actually, if I was as a commanding officer, if I wasn't spending time or trying to spend time, or the team weren't spending time bringing on those who are interested in going through the pipeline, then we're utterly failing. It's crazy. I do think you can prepare for it. I do think I think you can be over prepared, because then you lack authenticity. Remember the point about slim and imitations are rarely masterpieces. But I think I've probably lost my way in this question. I really apologise. I think. Joe, remind me. I've gone.
They were just sort of saying. So will the GS be looking for character traits, or are they just looking for the potential?
Yeah, no, there will be things they're looking for. There's no surprises. There are X number of dimensions that they look at. You're scored as a criteria that you're scored against, and they're looking for kind of consistency across the board. It won't be surprised to know that someone could be hugely bright, but not be able to apply that intellect to the practical application of intellect, and therefore that comes with risk. Whereas if someone is perhaps not got such a high score in terms of intellectual quotient or IQ, but they absolutely use what they've got, they probably come with less risk, and therefore have got a better chance. A really good friend of mine, one of my best friends growing up, we are still friends, went to RCB not long after I got my radio pass. His report said, effectively said, should not darken the doors of Westbury again. He spectacularly failed. He got cross on the command task. He got angry. He was intolerant. And he said, to be fair, the feedback was absolutely spot on. He said, I had a bad 3 days, and he said there were more than 3 testing days, but he chose not to go back, but he gave it a go. But he wasn't suited anyway, but I think he was bored of something to do over a long weekend.
Brilliant. There's a couple more questions specifically about AOSB. So the next question then, so at AOSB, during the leaderless task, how can you show that you're a team player and show that you've got leadership qualities?
Okay. So what I'm not doing is training people how to get to a leaderless task, but I'm answering a question which is different. Okay, on the leadership doctrine 1-pager, it talks about the command tools, which sits within the what leaders do bit, and next to the 3 circles of the dare, and it talks about plan, brief, control, support, inform, evaluate, or something like that. So as a leaderless, on the leaderless task, it's about perhaps unlocking the problem. That's great if you can see it, but if you can't, imposing your will enough on the group to be heard and to be contributing to something that is having an effect and making a difference, and it's not just white noise and frankly irritating, but is equally supporting. And it's really difficult thing to counsel on, because when you see it, you know what it looks like. When you know it's not working, and it's the nodding donkey just saying yes, well done, number red 24, that's fine. But it's being a team player where you're encouraging, you're not dominating, but the fundamental point is about having impact. When you speak, people listen. Now, you might come up with all the bad ideas, but the fact they're listening is key. It shows you have leadership skills, it shows you have influence, and if I was assessing AOSB, I would absolutely be taking notes. Conversely, and I've seen it on our late entry commissioning boards, which I've been involved with for a number of years, where there's an individual, a warrant officer, who had unlocked every problem. He'd probably been there watching, he'd probably done a bit of place OP work, but he had every solution to every single command task. And it was adamant that he had a really good sort of brain and mind for unlocking problems. But he had zero impact, because the group was closed with him. They ignored him, they didn't listen, and most of their tasks failed, despite him having the unlocking solution. And that's because he didn't have impact. And so therefore, and he did not get through. As good as he was in terms of what he could come up with, it was a huge red card in risk, because no one listened to him, so, or her. It was a him, so that's why I said him. Hope that makes sense. So have impact. Speak enough, which is a difficult guide to say, but don't over dominate and kind of allow others in. But don't sell yourself short and be too polite. If you're too polite, nothing's going to happen, and you won't have given a good account of yourself.
Yeah, so helping create that sense of urgency and moving the task on and looking for
get stuff done, having impacts. Yeah, a sense of urgency. You'll hear that all the time at AOSB, but not just counting out the time. Don't be the person who's always checking the time, because that's pointless. You're not adding value, and don't be the acrobat stuff between a tire with a pole between your legs, because you can't move from that position. And when you do get commands, think about where you position yourself, obviously, so you can see everything and you can control it well. I'm not demystifying AOSB. That should be fairly obvious.
Okay. Another AOSB question, and this is to do with trust. So you were the syndicate for a relatively very, very short period of time. How do you engender trust in such a short time with this group of people you've never met before?
I think the thing to remember, and to remind those in the team, there is no quota. Everyone can get through. Absolutely everyone can get through AOSB. Everyone can get through. Well, numbers as well, but so everyone can get through. It's not 2 out of 8 or whatever the case may be. And I think by having a conversation with those in the team, kind of day one, saying that we can all get through this together, and I don't mean through hardship. And there's a chapter in James Kerr's Legacy, and the term is well, what he's saying is he means don't be an idiot. There's no individual who's better than the team, and if you work well as a team and you support each other, you can actually you can all get through and you can execute the tasks. And what it really means is the important part of supporting a team. So when someone is in command, support them well, come up with ideas and work for them. And if everyone's doing it, it doesn't need to be contentious. It doesn't need to be frictious. You don't have to be, a loudmouth to achieve the effect. And I would be saying, we can all get through this. It's all of one team. There's no need to backstab and give everyone a chance, even in things like discussions. Unfortunately, you'll sometimes get the odd individual who's sharp-elbowed, and there are ways and times to perhaps loosen their foundations a bit, and let's find a moment to do that, perhaps, if it needs to happen, if they're having a detrimental effect on the group. But I would say an early chat, a bit of peer mentorship, and by doing so, you're already showing latent leadership skills and are likely to be listened to.
Yeah, so that's the opportunity with the cup of tea and the coffee break, isn't it? Just to cement the group again.
Yeah, fire everyone up, get them all fired up.
Brilliant.
And go for it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's probably I enjoyed it too much. There's a couple of stories there which I won't check. So yeah, anyway, it was a good time. It was a good time. I'm afraid I didn't do particularly well.
Brilliant. I want to take you back to your second term at Sandhurst, and you said that your colour sergeant just had an iron rule, but that it helped you in the long term. So the question was, how did it help you? So could you just maybe expand with some more anecdotes?
Yeah, I can, and I knew I know when I was saying that this evening, I thought, did I make sense? Because I ask lots of questions myself and perhaps overthink some things. It was the first 2 or 3 weeks where it was show parades, and that's okay, sir. What are you doing tonight? That's okay, sir. You can show solidarity with X and join him on show parade for removing fluff from chin or whatever the case was. It was really about adapting to his particular style. And when I took myself out the moment a few times, and actually I've learned to do that a bit on the running company. It's so intense, and you sometimes just need to, effectively cutting a long story short, I nearly ran off a cliff, not bunged on properly because I was too keen to show I'm going to do this and I'll get after it. And I was about to run off a cliff, not tied on properly, and that would have been really silly. And it was slightly worrying that I was swept up into such a frenzy of I was going to do everything and do anything, and I wanted to succeed, and not to the detriment of others. I was just, I think we were all a bit like that, to be honest. But I realised that he had his reasons. Looking from the other side of the hill, and I think that's a really important point. Take yourself out of the moment, view the situation from the other side of the hill, and you'll often be surprised with what you see, outside looking in. And I think I did that, and I realised that he was well intended. He was a lovely man. It was quite difficult initially to break down and get behind his quite rough and serious, Scottish demeanour. I'm not being anti-Scottish at all, but it was a gruff and fairly, rigid, Scottish sort of front, I suppose. But we then saw instances where his character was coming was coming out, a bit of a giggle, slightly light-hearted about some things, and you saw he was slightly softer in areas. And I sort of reconciled the fact that I think he helped us because we probably had got a little bit cocksure, and we'd only finished junior term, and yet we were performing really, really well. But in the interest of the likes of marginal gains and continuous improvement, there are areas where we probably could have helped ourselves. Our reputation with others wasn't so good. Our relationships with other platoons probably wasn't so good. We didn't really care. We were in the moment, and it was all about temperature. But in hindsight, you've got to look beyond your immediate team because it is about having impact for the right reason. And so I think recognise that he was trying to help us by cutting us down a few pegs, making us more greater humility, and it took a bit of time to adjust to that because we just thought we were doing brilliantly, and we kind of were, but we weren't necessarily our sort of ways and means were not particularly perhaps as graceful and as just as they might have been. And I think a lot of him was character development, but it took me and a lot of us quite a bit of time to see it. By the end of second term, it was I'm still a big fan of Sergeant Major Higgins, or Colour Sergeant Higgins then. But Colour Sergeant Clark was in my sort of development, it was very special. But it was just a baptism of fire at the beginning, but he taught us lots, and I hope you answered the question there. It was kind of take it out the moment and view, look back in and see his view, and I think it can really help you understand and unpick what might not be obvious.
Yeah, Tim Peaks was coming to my mind there when you were saying about your colour, sort of this ruling everybody with this iron rule. When he says he always says about Sandhurst, and it's everyone is treated equally abysmally. Everyone's treated the same, equally abysmally. I think that's a great quote from Tim Peaks.
Yeah,
it's just that point about humility.
Yeah, although I do think it's this is, it's embarrassing to say, but it was 20 years ago now. But I've been back to Sandhurst a lot, and the whole approach is very, very different. The whole focus on, not that it was bad, it was different system with a different time. And you've got to be careful sometimes without the context and judging from a contemporary lens. Got to be a bit careful about false takeaways. Stuff that there was some stuff that wasn't great, but gives us some loads of amazing things. Whereas now it's the coaching culture's there, a lot more mentoring, there's a lot more sort of peer mentorship. The focus on physical training is slightly more progressive. You're not into boots from day one, and therefore you're not having lower leg in women. There's less impact. There's more considered and more sensible approaches to heightened fitness, and a lot of stuff on within the CAB setup on behavioural science, and I think it's a really good package. But it's some way it's come on a lot since I was there, as special as my time there was, even though I had 2 years.
Brilliant. Time is always has got ahead of me at Tempus Fugit. So last question, and there have been so many brilliant questions. I've tried my best to get through them for you, and I'm going to try and get 3 for the price of 1 here.
Okay. And
they're all around this idea of trust.
Okay.
So can we tell if someone really trusts us? Or can you tell if somebody really trusts you? The next point is, how can you regain trust if the trust of your person, if you've lost the trust of your personnel? And then the last point is I suppose putting together trust in a toxic environment, and if there is a toxic environment, can it be changed, and how can it be changed? And those will be that will be the last question, and then we'll hand over to Major.
Okay. I mean, those they're massive questions. I mean, I look at those; they are dissertation worthy, each on their own, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, can you tell if someone trusts you? I think you can, and it's about how their approach, their demeanour, their behaviour towards you, and are you being checked up on you? And I think I know when I've not felt trusted, in that you feel quite constrained, that it's either being over-communicated, or progress is being checked up too frequently, or you're having to report back too frequently, or you're not given enough responsibility, you're not brought into the Simon said, we talk about the circle of safety. You're slightly on the outside. It's in and out of in team interactions, perhaps. So I think you would see it through behaviours and actions, and often it's that sort of more remote, cold, the antithesis of what Amy Cuddy talks about in terms of that warmth of those impressions. And I think it requires an element of emotional intelligence, so self-awareness, but social awareness and relationship management to appreciate with someone if that's the case. But I would hope it would be relatively straightforward if someone interested, and also if it's suddenly changed. But that may be for good reason. So I'd probably look at particular instances to try and work that out, I think. And are they giving responsibility? Are they cutting you in? And are they challenging you and giving you difficult tasks? If it's all there's the skill will matrix and the delegation models, which are really good into what sort of tasks you give to what sort of people. And if you're being given a lot of stuff all the time, it's probably because you've got a job to do, probably good to a busy person, and that's how it makes it interesting. How can you regain trust? I think by fessing up if you for the reason you've made a mistake and therefore you've lost that trust. It happens. Everyone makes mistakes, and that I was quite hard over on. I think I am quite hard over on criminal negligence or reckless behaviour. Those are the kind of strike items, and I say deficits in those. In character, question of integrity, I would struggle, and I do struggle. I've made plenty of mistakes, and I'm certainly not righter than right. But in my own mind, I'm glad to realise that I would struggle with not forgiving, but it would take a bit of time for me to regain trust with me on those. But I think you have to prove, there was no malintent. It was a mistake. Mistakes, no issues with mistakes. But just fess up and cut the person in early, because if you cut them in early, you can do something about it. And by fronting it up, you'd be honest. It's like I'd say to my 6-year-old son, if he'd done something, if he admits to doing it immediately, there's no issue. There's a kind of, come on, you don't do that, or whatever the case. And my wife would laugh at me giving parental advice because I'm not very good. But the point being is, by fessing up and being straight, that's good character, and that's great learning. And the challenge is, if you then go and punish them for doing that, it's like a dog. Where do you teach them? You're teaching them that I've told the truth and I've got punished. Well, I won't tell the truth again because then I won't get punished. It sounds obvious, but these are usually psychologists to talk things like this through. But I hope that makes sense. Fess it up, cut them in early, and stuff will be done about it, and don't do the same thing again. And the final one is toxic. Yeah, so I did a master's in a couple of leadership-related masters, and one of my dissertations was about 360-degree feedback. That was about, and the reason I did that was partly to do with the 180-degree feedback I explained earlier about being waterboarded and that not working properly. Not I was being waterboarded, the experience as if it might have been. That would be really cool. And one of it, I looked into, should the Army implement 360-degree feedback as a leadership development tool? It was talking about doing it in the leadership document at the time, about developing leaders. And so I looked quite closely at the Americans. The Americans, US Army, were very good at saying, we've got a problem with toxic leadership, what are we going to do about it? So they implemented 360. They recognised that it's a good tool to highlight deficiencies, highlight areas of weakness, but it shouldn't be used for appraisals. And also, my key finding was, it's a good, it identifies and it can shine the light on certain areas. But if you are toxic, you are a toxic leader, then you have to be willing to be receptive to the feedback, be willing to change, and be willing to self-regulate. If you're not, it's kind of futile activity. I think it's easy to change, and there have people who have argued in the past that there is a place for toxic leadership, providing you have a mature ability to succession plan well. There's been a bit of an unpleasant person, and you succession plan with someone who's a bit more pleasant. I think that's a bit disappointing, and I think we should be getting rid of anyone who is toxic in their leadership approach, because they're not needed, they're not necessary, and the effects are often unrelenting and far-reaching. So you can do it, just as the commanding officer did it at Arborfield, as I explained earlier. He was just human. He recognised the issues. He spoke to people. He drank more tea. It was a breath of fresh air, and it was a really good case study on how to do it. But he was right. He realised there were issues, and he was keen to get after them. So I think it's easier than people think, but it is closely linked to trust, and those people who might have trust issues. But it wouldn't concern me going to a toxic environment, to try and unpick it. And I see it as quite a nice challenge, actually. Because it's a nice challenge. Actually.
Thank you for sort of your how candid you've been and how open you've been, and all the sort of very detailed answers you've given everybody. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Major King, just to close up this evening. Thank you again, Colonel.
And also, on behalf of everybody who attended this evening, and to give you some idea, we had just over 500 people on the call, possibly more on where we were being streamed through YouTube. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of those people for a really fascinating presentation and insight into your career. And it was, I certainly felt I would reflecting as back on my time as a sort of officer cadet, I would have benefited at that time for the sort of insight that you've been able to provide. And I think added to that, the way you're able to talk through your career and talk about that presence and absence of character and competence and trust, and how it made you feel at those particular points. I think that was a real takeaway from me. A huge amount of stuff in here, and so much to unpack, to take away, and go and look at and reconsider. And that's great, because this is recorded, so people can take this away and reflect on some of those things. I feel I have a little bit more reading to do, Colonel, because I could only find one book on my shelf.
It's a good book. It's a good book.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would recommend to everybody who's on the call to revisit the leadership on a page slide that Colonel Ketterer shared. I had the opportunity to serve with Colonel Ketterer at EMEA OTC when that was being rolled out, and it proved to be an excellent tool for those discussions around leadership, and certainly something I've gone on to use elsewhere. And I think finally my other takeaway was of all the books that you showed, not one of them, well maybe only one of them came from a military standpoint, and that for me really said that as an organization, we are not necessarily the experts on and leadership, and there are plenty of other places out there we should go and draw on their experiences to build on top of our own. So, sir, thank you very much for this evening. It's been fantastic. Final word to all of the people who've participated. So a number of you have expressed an interest in joining the Army Reserve as part of the sign-up process. We will be in touch over the coming days and weeks to start to help you on that journey and start to signpost you the routes that you are looking to go for. So just keep an eye out for that, because we will get back to you. There is a survey in the chat. I would ask you to fill in 2 questions. One question is, what did you like about this evening? And the second question is, what could we do to improve it? Completely anonymous, but we would absolutely welcome your feedback. Colonel, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you to all the participants, and good night.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks very much. Feedback really welcome.